Wake up, everybody. We are here with another exciting edition of the biggest weekly news analysis program, Media Monitor, live right here on Africa's news leader. That's SABC News with myself, Alicia Jali. Let's give you a quick taste of what we have in store for you today. Durban was a hive of activity and we don't want to miss out. So, of course, we're going to be discussing the highlights of the World Economic Forum. The NC's weekly media briefings continue ahead, of course, of the June policy discussions documents. And we cross over live to our reporter, SABC reporter Aldrin Sampier, who will join us live from Luthuli House. And 3 former South African presidents kicked off their national dialogue on the political as well as economical state of the nation. And finally wrap up the show by looking at SAFA's decision on the newly announced Bafana coach Stuart Baxter. But first, as always, it's 900 hours Central African time. Let's take a quick look at the news making headlines. Former Finance Minister Trevor Manuel has accused the ANC of mismanaging the country, saying the party should not be re-elected if it is to rely on laundered money to win the elections. He was delivering the keynote address at the Kada Asmal Memorial Lecture at the University of Cape Town. Manuel also reacted to the perception that President Jacob Zuma was stalling in signing legislation meant to stop money laundering. 16 of the 18 learners who were killed in a collision between a minibus taxi and a truck in Verena outside Bronkhorstspruit have been buried in the same area yesterday. The remaining 2 learners will be buried today in Limpopo and KwaZulu-Natal respectively. The driver of the minibus taxi was buried last week. Thousands of mourners, including family, friends, as well as top government officials from Gauteng and Mpumalanga, attended the proceedings. And Kaizer Chiefs saw their ABSA Premiership title hopes fade away when they were held to a 1-1 draw by the Lemontville Golden Arrows at the FNB Stadium in Johannesburg last night. Now, Chiefs took the lead in the 75th minute before Arrows equalized in stoppage time. And Amakosi remained rooted in the 4th spot on the log. They had to win last night's match and their remaining 3 fixtures in order to have any slight chance of winning the league. Sad news. And on the show this morning, very pleased to welcome SABC digital multimedia producer, Mr. Neo Motong. Neo, good morning to you.
Good morning, Alicia. How are you? All
right, I'm very well, thank you. Neo, on the main panel, I do have media specialist, Mr. Melo Makhulego, political analyst, Mr. Dumisani Hlope, and from our Pretoria studios, we are hoping to be joined by Professor Somadoda Figeni. Gentlemen, a very good morning to both of you. Welcome back.
Good morning.
All right, now let's take it away. What were the biggest hashtags?
It was a big week this week. Tim Omotoso, Prophet Tim Omotoso, still making news on social media, not only locally but internationally. I mean, we asked a question on our social media platform: what do you make of the congregates who continue to support religious leader alleged or proven to have behaved badly or even criminally? I mean, you have 14% of those who took part saying, "Who are we to judge?"
That's interesting.
Yes, 21% says it's an indoctrination, 34% say desperation to faith, and 31% says personal choice.
So what did the people in turn then say besides this poll, Neil?
I mean, we saw mixed reactions on social media. I mean, this is by T saying Tim Omotoso should be jailed. After deported back to his country, his recruiters also deserve to rot in jail.
Let's get more views on that story. Lebusa says, hashtag Tim Omotoso, I thank God for your life, Papa. You are a true man of God. Hashtag free Tim Omotoso.
These are the reactions we saw. I mean, this one by Tabiso, a final one, saying hashtag Tim Omotoso. It's ironic that this fake pastor is defended by young women and mothers. This is saddening.
Very saddening indeed. I want to hear from the gentleman. Dumsan, let's start with you. Don't smile. What do you think about the developments on this case?
It is quite saddening, but it's pretty common when the big men are faced with the challenges of rape and sexual abuse to be defended by women and young girls. My assumption is that in the process of abusing a whole lot, I think they do take care of a few in anticipation of such challenges somewhere down the line.
I suppose, Melo, the question again, where are we as a country when it comes to religion versus the law?
I think ultimately for me this issue speaks to notions of consent and respecting people's rights.
Absolutely.
Right? Because I mean things like rape, it's an infringement of people's rights. But also, like, just to pick up on what Dumisane has said, I think one of the critical things is that we tend to want to have a one-sided view of a person. Humans are complex. A person can be both bad and good at the same time, and we shouldn't just want to discount the other because of a few good things that a person has done.
Very interesting outlook there. Now let's go to the next big hashtag of this week. Got me thinking there, Melo.
It's the World Forum in Africa 2017.
We missed out, of course, because we had to be here at work. All right, but what was happening? What is this that we're looking at?
It's taking place in Durban. We asked the question on social media once again, do you think the outcome of World Africa 2017 will make any difference to your life? 55% said no.
Wow.
10% said yes, and you have 21% saying I'll wait and see. Then 14% say were there outcomes. You know, it's a question. It's a
big question. People are not convinced.
No,
I mean, we do hear that nothing is ever signed, in particular at the World Economic Forum. It is, however, discussions that people can engage with on a further platform to try and effect those solutions. Let's look at the tweets now.
I mean, the new Minister of Finance, Melusi Gigaba, really created a stir on social media, and people were really impressed by what he had to say. I mean, you have Yonela saying so impressed with Minister of Finance, Melusi Gigaba's emphasis on education. And the following tweet also says, I am impressed by what he said in relation of black-owned local businesses. We have to look at other better businesses prospects.
Hashtag Gigaba. Ruvembo Kaukonde says, Minister Gigaba, adaptability and dynamism. Young people should get involved at a young age. Take on a variety of assignments. Hashtag WEF Africa 17. I know President Jacob Zuma was very impressed that he has initially put young people in charge of the economy. Dumsani?
I know the minister personally, and I think he's very articulate and knowledgeable. But sometimes in this country we got caught up in individuals rather than the structures and the dynamics of the economy. So as articulate as he is, I mean, he keeps saying that, you know, the policies, are not changing. So the question is, as much as he understands these issues, how does he intend, to accelerate, transformation in the context of the non-change of the existing policies that have been there for the last donkey years.
And have been problematic. Melo, what do you think?
I think for me, these WF platforms are very interesting because as we remember, like in 1992, it was in Davos where Mandela was convinced that nationalization actually is no longer where the world should be at. I mean, it was the Chinese and Vietnamese that managed to convince him of that. So it's very interesting to look at where people say that these things actually do not have an impact on their day-to-day lives, but then ultimately they do have an impact because policies that get made at that level, I mean, for example, if South Africa had taken an alternative path, I mean, we would have made much more inclusive economy as opposed to what we have at the moment.
You know, that begs the question, how well informed is our society, particularly our youth, when it comes to our economic issues, so that, you have that right to say, you know what, I want to make a contribution or even a comment to say, I think this does not work. All right, now, finally, what can we look at before I let you go?
It's Bafana. After 4 months, they have a coach. It was announced.
Stuart Baxter is the new lucky man.
Yes.
Congratulations to him.
That's great
news. I'm very, very interested to hear what people are saying on social media.
We also had a poll. I mean, the question was finally, okay, there it is. The poll asked, SAFA finally appoints Stuart Baxter as Bafana coach. Are you happy? Hashtag SABC News. We had about 41% saying yes, and then 59% of them saying no. So there are huge numbers of people who are saying no, unlike the previous.
Let's look at the tweets. Do you have any tweets about that? Particularly, I mean, I think his team sent him off to a great send-off yesterday, winning by 3-2 against that team yesterday. But we're going to talk about soccer much later on. Let's focus on this first. Pumzile Mpompo says, all the best to the new hashtag Bafana coach, Stuart Baxter. I hope the whole nation will support him 100%.
And the following tweet is, didn't Baxter do badly at Bafana first time around? Is he being called back because he did well at the Kaizer Chiefs? I mean, those are just mixed reactions.
And Katarina Ribesel says, welcome back, Stuart Baxter. Stuart Baxter, hashtag Bafana. You know, a lot of people are concerned if he can go to Kaizer Chiefs. I mean, if he can move to Super Sport and then bring all the players that were at Kaizer Chiefs. Isn't he going to do the same when it comes to Bafana Bafana? Are we ever going to see new players, Melo? A quick one.
Well, I mean, very interesting. I mean, the job of head coach of Bafana Bafana, I think it's also a bit political also, because then the various clubs also want their players to be featured in the national team. And if that doesn't happen, then obviously that tends to usually lead to problems.
Dumsadi, a quick one.
I'm still aggrieved at how he left Kaizer Chiefs, being a Kaizer Chiefs fan myself.
Yeah.
Although I'm rethinking that thing. But look, I expect him to bring more young stars into Bafana Bafana. I think the way that he did well with Kaizer Chiefs was blending in young stars with experienced players. So I expect him to do that.
Look, I think he's doing a good job at SuperSport. Now give our viewers out there the URL where they can get all this information at home.
So you can get all this information on our Facebook is SABC News Online. Also Twitter is SABC News Online. YouTube, where you get the show, is also SABC Digital News.
All right. Now we'll obviously probably see you next week. Thank you so much for all the content that you gathered for us this week. When we return, we're going to discuss the highlights of the World Economic Forum on Africa 2017 that took place in Durban this past week. You don't want to miss that. It's coming up after this. Well, a very good morning and welcome to AM News live at 10:00 hours across all Central Africa regions.
A fitting send-off for a revolutionary giant, a life dedicated in service of the people.
The result means that the Swallows are out of the ABC Municipal League and drop to the amateur fourth tier of South African football, the SAB League.
Tune in on AM News every Saturday and Sunday from 10 hours.
Welcome back to Media Monitor. Now, the World Economic Forum on Africa 2017 was hosted in Durban this past week. The three-day forum was attended by a number of continental as well as global leaders under the theme, Achieving Inclusive Growth Through Responsive as well as Responsible Leadership. Now, in his wrap discussion at the summit, Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa said it is important for sustainable inclusive growth to inform every policy decision. Let's find out more in this clip.
Our attention now needs to be on our ability to take action on deliverables. When we convene again in 2018, somewhere on this continent, we need to demonstrate the gains that have been made in expanding economic opportunities for all our people, but more importantly to the youth of this continent. We need to demonstrate how the economic status of women on our continent has improved, how we have expanded youth employment and skills development. We also need to demonstrate how our governments are managing public finances and are also allocating resources more effectively to support inclusive growth.
All right, for this segment, we're very pleased to be joined by our very own economics reporter, Mr. Tsepo Mongwai, who was part of the forum. I'm so jealous, Tsepo. A very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning.
Now, Tsepo, you had all the fun in Durban. Give us some of the very interesting highlights that came out from the WEF.
Well, as you would know, World Economic Forum on Africa, it's a platform for business as well as government in the main to meet and discuss various issues that are facing the continent. It ranges from issues of technological advancement, infrastructure, So there are a whole lot of discussions that are taking place. But I think what's important is to look at the fact that why do people or businesses in the first place go to the World Economic Forum? I think number one is it's an opportunity for business to meet different leaders as well as other businesses to discuss important deal and investment. Struggling businesses, they have an opportunity to meet different funders and to try to access funding, and some of this meeting have been scheduled a year ago because you have access to the who's who in the business fraternity, even small business that are looking to access government leaders. They know that paying, it's a huge fee. I think it ranges over 20,000 rand. You have access to government ministers, and you can sit down and try to
it's a great networking
raise your issues. It is, and even for small businesses, startups that have made technological advancement, the so-called disruptors, they have an opportunity to get funding and support from such an event. But another important issue is, if you look at the plenary, we are told that this was the well-attended World Economic Forum on Africa. But if you look going into plenaries, you realize the numbers did not reconcile. So you could see that more and more people, in fact, some don't even attend those plenaries. They are there because they want to attend, they want to network, they've got meetings to do. But it's still an opportunity to listen to people who are expert in different sectors and hear their views and how they think issues should be tackled.
Gentlemen, what do you think? I mean, we do know that nothing is signed, obviously, at the World Economic Forum, but how significant then is such a forum, particularly for Africa, when we talk about inclusive growth?
Well, it's important. I think this one, it comes at an ironic moment where the South African economy is being downgraded to a junk status. Secondly, where South Africa's role within Africa's political economy has seriously declined in the few years. So I think it was important to the extent that perhaps it did indicate that the South African economy is still strong enough. The systems and the institutions are still in place to advance some serious economic growth in the country. So for me, for all of these people to descend to Durban to participate as they did, I think it gives that vote of confidence on South Africa's ability to come back and play a major important role economically. My challenge, though, that I foresee is that I think when it comes to African politics, when South Africa has been mandated to drive the development in the African continent, we have seriously let the ball down in that aspect.
The issues of intra-trade came up quite a lot, Melo.
Yes, very much so, Alicia. I think for me, two issues that came up that were very interesting was the notion of inclusive growth versus radical economic transformation. And the second one, as you mentioned, is intracontinental trade. I mean, as we know, the continent has moved towards a model where we're going to have regional integration, and from the regional integration being that the various regions trade with each other, being East Africa, West Africa, and so on. And then from there on, the global continent would sort of like move more towards a free trade area. I think for me, one of the interesting things is that South Africa, within the Southern African development community, is that we sort of like fund like your Swazilands and your Lesothos through the South African Customs Union, where a lot of their money actually dependent on fiscus allocations from South Africa. So that for me is interesting in terms of why can't we accelerate integration on that angle, because we have so much control over their fiscal matters. I think on the issues of inclusive growth versus radical economic transformation, I think the important thing here is that you have on the one side people wanting us to use a vocabulary of inclusive growth, and on the other side people wanting us to use a vocabulary of radical economic transformation. So what is the difference? For me, I think the difference with radical economic transformation is that there's more of a redistributionist type rhetoric in it, more of favoring black people, as opposed to with an inclusive growth, people are sort of saying, you know what, whatever businesses have already been created at the moment, let them be, and let's create new businesses in order to include more people into the economy. But I think that logic somehow is fundamentally flawed, because As you've seen, we've had a high growth period during Mbeki's years, but then black people were not absorbed into the economy. And part of the thing that will happen there is that South Africa is predominantly a mining economy. Well, it was predominantly a mining economy, and we had a shift from that industry into more financialization, and then that had lower labor absorption. So therefore you had a lot of growth, but then growth was concentrated in the financial sector, and where you had like a lot of labor absorption in terms of mining, you had a lot of job attritions. So these are the type of things for me I think that people want to discuss. But in terms of that also, there's the issue of ratings agencies, as Dumisani has correctly pointed out. The one thing that's very important is that South Africa is very much dependent on global capital flows in order to fund its current account deficit. And the important thing there is that with this talk of inclusive growth versus radical economic transformation is that people are perceiving it as that government's going to put itself in a position where it's no longer able to pay back the debt that those private interests have lent to government.
Always with an interesting perspective, Melo. Let's now welcome Professor Somadoda Figeni from our Pretoria studios. A very good morning to you, Prof. What do you make of this big talk around inclusive growth around the continent in particular?
Well, to me, I don't necessarily think that themes that are chosen in any conference make any difference, but the key question is why some of the themes which have featured in the AU meetings, which have featured in the SADC meetings, have not been implemented, such as the promotion of the intra-Africa trade, the opening of borders in terms of trade and commercial transactions, and the issue of industrialization and beneficiation of our raw materials. That to me is one subject that seemed not to feature prominently in this previous meeting. We do have a challenge now of policy overload and a rhetoric overload for each conference. Instead of stepping back to say, we've had so many initiatives, why can't we just dedicate one conference to look at why these things are not being realized? Instead, the nomenclature or the new themes are being generated. That to me is key, especially at this particular time of the downgrades, of fiscal constraints, of global geopolitical uncertainties. What are the implications of those? That to me didn't feature strongly.
So the professor is not convinced. He says, I mean, very, very serious and core issues were not necessarily discussed. I mean, I remember Wolfgang Schäuble warning, the masses that were gathered there saying, we need to get ready for the fourth industrial revolution. Now, a lot of people don't know what's going to happen with that. Take us through that.
Well, the issue of technological advancement featured very strongly. There were several platforms that discussed the issue, and there were quite a few ideas that came to the front. But I think Africa is still very segmented. Sovereignty is still a key word for most countries. They believe that they need to protect it. They are independent. And as a result, there is some serious reluctance to open up. And they see opening up as a threat, perhaps not to protect their businesses, not to protect their interest. We could see even in our neighboring countries, not much is happening. And it's one of the issues that were raised, that Africa cannot move unless we start moving together. There were several deals that were signed there with Germany, some German companies, and some of the leaders say that please treat us as independent states.
Absolutely.
Africa is not one. We've got two different laws. We're not the same. So it's very difficult for most investors when they come in Africa, because if they want to move spread from South Africa to the rest of the continent, they have to face different regulations that are not in harmony, that are way different, and that takes time in order to invest. So there is no move. But on a grand scale, leaders would agree that indeed this is something that they need to do. But when it comes to the practicality, it's not happening.
You know, Tsapa, I know we've run out of time, but I just want to give you one last question before you go. Melo alluded to this earlier on. We do know that there was quite a discussion around, the ratings agencies. What was the common issue when it comes to the challenges with the African personnel with the ratings agencies? What was their challenge?
The issue is the views are quite differs. There are those who are saying that, look, we should not ascribe to the notion of rating agency. We should establish our own. But there is no access to capital markets outside, confirming to rating agencies. We know that. We certainly know that some African countries are trying to go beyond the traditional capital markets, but it's still very difficult. South Africa had a bilateral meeting with Singapore, and one of the issues is try to access their capital markets. It's small, but something can be done there. So there is BRICS that they're trying to come up with a rating agency there. Okay. But
so there is an extension to this debate, Tsep.
Absolutely there is, but it's a long way to get there. The traditional way of doing things is still quite dominant.
You're supposed to assure us. Tepo Mangwai, SABC Econ reporter, right here in studio with us, talking to us about some of the interesting highlights from the recent World Economic Forum on Africa that convened in Durban. After the break, we touch base with SABC reporter Aldrin Sampier, who will be joining us live from Luthuli House to tell us more about the ANC's media weekly briefings ahead of the June policy documents. It's coming up after this break. Stay tuned.
Hindu devotees took a holy dip at Sangam, the confluence of rivers Ganges. People and priests made their way to the banks before the break of dawn. Security arrangements were in place for police forces patrolling on the river banks to ensure smooth functioning of the event.
A mobile museum in India's West Mumbai is highlighting the skills and creativity of residents of one of Asia's largest slums.
That's what we've been doing here, is creating this platform, and we came here to help it develop and to, just build it up.
Welcome back. Now, the NC's media weekly briefings ahead of the June policy conference continue this morning at Luthuli House. And this time around, the party will give more details on proposals made on its social transformation discussion document. Aldrin Sampier joins us live from Luthuli House. Aldrin, a very good morning to you. Do give us the latest on what can we expect on today's media briefing, particularly on the discussion documents that are focused on today.
Well, today's discussion document is social transformation, and quite a number of proposals that the subcommittee is making with regards to fostering or enforcing social transformation as well as social cohesion. And one of those proposals, for instance, is a proposal looking into giving support. It says that legislation should be developed to protect people from unjustified repossessions when they face financial difficulties. And remember, this is a big issue, especially in townships, where people in townships have their houses repossessed. I remember about a month ago, there was a story of a man in Soweto, if I'm not mistaken, who owed around 100 Rand to a bank, and the bank wanted to repossess the house. And the ANC is saying that there should be legislation to protect those type of people. But then the other argument is that how do you balance the right of the bank to reclaim the money that has been lost or reclaim money that's been owed to them, but also the right and the need for human dignity as well, because considering that these are people that go into these houses, who purchase these houses because they need that shelter, but then the bank steps in when there are defaults in payments and then decide to repossess the houses. The ANC is also speaking about the question on whether there should be a limit to who can access RDP houses. But Alicia, this is not a new debate. This has been a debate that has been going on since 2009 when President Jacob Zuma started the Human Settlements Department, replacing it with the Housing Department. And then Minister Tokyo Sexwale asked the question and made it clear that government cannot forever deliver RDP houses. There must come a stage where people can buy their own homes. And this is a discussion that's still continuing, but it seems as though that the ANC is not bold enough to say that indeed the party needs to stop or government needs to stop issuing RTP houses or free housing, because even if you look at this document, if there's one thing for certain that the party prides itself in, it's the millions of houses that it's been able to deliver for free.
But speaking of housing and RDP houses there, Aldrin, I mean, we do know the term in higher education, we have the missing middle. Talk to us about this, the new issue that has been introduced, the gap housing that has made its way back on the table now.
Well, this is another balancing act that the government needs to find, is that when you look at the fees must fall instance where we had the missing middle, where you find that you have people who earn enough money, who earn too much rather to qualify for NSFAS funding, but don't earn enough to get their own, to source their own funding from institutions, from lending institutions, as well as funding personally their own education. So what we have in the housing market as well is that you have a situation where you have people who are working who earn too much money, like you find, for instance, people like nurses, police officers, teachers, they earn too much to qualify for an RTP house, to qualify for free housing. However, though, they earn too little to qualify for banks to give them houses, to give them financial support or financial assistance for housing. So what the ANC is calling on is that they're calling on the banking institutions to come to the party to help fund or subsidize at least this gap, this housing gap that we currently find at the moment, where you have professionals like teachers, as I mentioned earlier on, and nurses who have the money. However, though, they don't earn enough to qualify for financial assistance.
You know, another interesting topic there on today's discussions, Eldrin, is of course there is that push for sports to get more funding, including, very interestingly, a levy on sports ticket. Do tell us how that is planned to pan out.
Well, we have to see how people, and especially those in the sports fraternity, respond to this, because the ANC is making the suggestion that there should be a 5% levy on tickets that are being sold on big events and so forth. But what this essentially means is that you and I, those who watch sports, those who go to these sports events and tournaments as well, would have to cough out extra, because the organizers of these events will certainly push the 5% levy to the final consumer, to the person who will be buying the ticket at the end of the day. So we'll have to see and wait and see, rather, how sports fans as well as sports organizers respond to this. But this is in line with the National Sports and Recreational Plan to ensure that there are sports facilities, sports infrastructure across the country, including in every school as well. The ANC is also making the proposal that if you look into the municipal infrastructure fund, that the municipal infrastructure fund, there should be a 15% that is ring-fenced, that will particularly look at sports infrastructure. Now, the big debate here is that how do you take 15% from, let's say, about 8 billion rand for sports infrastructure, when that same fund is supposed to be a fund that helps make sure that every person in South Africa has access to water, has access to proper sanitation, for instance, and has access to electricity. So how do you again make that balancing act? And the ANC is arguing that sports as well as recreational facilities is not a luxury, it's a necessity. All
right, Aldrin, a very quick one before I let you go. I am interested in knowing who forms the basis of this committee. We have seen the different constituencies headed by the different NEC members of the ANC, but who in particular is dealing with the social transformation discussions?
Well, the subcommittee chair is Lindiwe Sisulu, who is the Human Settlements Minister, and that's the reason that she's chairing this subcommittee. But also, you have Batabile Dlamini, who is the Social Development Minister. But of course, she'll be here if that's if the minister does decide, this is Human Settlements Minister, Sisulu does decide to invite the likes of Batabile Dlamini to be part of this discussion. But I think quite particularly, Alicia, something that just came to mind right now is that what I find absent in this document, and I guess this is a debate that the ANC needs to have as well, is the issue around xenophobia. How do you deal with the issue around xenophobia? Because if you look at the discussion documents, the ANC deals with xenophobia as a criminal issue rather than a societal issue. Because if you look at the attacks on foreign nationals, these are attacks that are happening in townships. These are attacks that are happening in towns as well. It speaks to a social issue where people are speaking about there are limited infrastructure, limited resources that they have to share with them foreign nationals, whether these are foreign nationals who are here illegally or whether they are here legally. Because one of the proposals that the party makes, for instance, in this document is that there should be a cap to the proliferation of big stores, big chain stores like the likes of ShopRite, Pick n Pay, in townships. But remember that the businesses in townships as well have also been making the argument that there should be, the government should regulate the number of foreign nationals who own shops in township, because they feel as well that the foreign-owned shops are squeezing out these local retailers as well as these small businesses that are being held and tuck shops that are being held by local community members.
Thank you so much for that update, Aldrin. We'll definitely touch base with you during our crossings from 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock. That is Aldrin Sampier, live to us, of course, from Lutuli House. Now, gentlemen, let's talk about that. I mean, what is your pick on this? We've seen, of course, the issue focusing on the economic transformation. This one is social transformation. Very big issues there, Melo. What do you think?
I mean, obviously, on the issue of social transformation, what the ANC has put forward is issues of social cohesion. That will be dealing with issues of xenophobia and race in the country. And I think, obviously, the ANC has been very much in the post-TRC mode of engaging with issues of race in this country, and they do not want to be forthright and address some of the economic challenges. So I think, on that perspective, talking about social cohesion in isolation of economic changes in the country, I don't think it's going to achieve much.
Yeah, issues like racism, things like
well,
that.
Look, my take is that the ANC is discussing issues that no, let me put it this way. The ANC is not discussing issues that it should be discussing. There are three primary things that it should be discussing, and none of these things is in their document. One is leadership. They are discussing everything else except leadership. So they can come with grand conclusion, but without a properly defined role and responsibility of leadership, they are unable to move forward. Secondly is the question of internal power dynamics. Which
didn't they tackle that though on their previous media briefings?
No, they don't. They discuss. When they discussed, they were supposed to discuss that under a paper called The Balance of Forces. But when they...
Because I know they did discuss issues of leadership and the succession debates and so forth.
Alicia, it's supposed to be a separate document on its own, not sneaked in inside one of the documents. So,
all right, Doomsday.
So they are not discussing that. And they are not discussing issues of capacity to perform. These are documents that have to be developed individually, extensively, and be deliberated, and then the rest shall follow.
All right. Well, we're going to leave it there because we don't have time for any more inputs on that. We're going to take a quick ad break, and after that, former presidents FW de Klerk, Mbeki, and Motlanthe all convened to launch a national dialogue on political as well as economic issues facing the country. It's coming up right after this. Three former presidents have united to kickstart a national dialogue to discuss the deep and pervasive crisis facing the country. The National Foundations Dialogue Initiative, the NFDI, consists of 8 foundations, namely the Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe, FW de Klerk, Thabo Mbeki, the Helen Suzman, Desmond and Leah Tutu Legacy, Umlambo, Chief Albert Luthuli, as well as the Jakes Garval. The main objective of all these is the session is, of course, to facilitate engagement among South Africans through conversations about issues that are key to nation building. The topic of the session is entitled, "Why Does South Africa Need a National Dialogue? A Call to the Nation." Let's find out more in this clip.
Stand up and defend our constitutional democracy. Work together to build a strong economy that will bring greater justice and equality to all. Oppose racism from any quarter and move forward as a strong nation, united in our diversity. Let us reason together about the future of our beloved country.
Our country is immersed in a general and worsening crisis which impacts and will continue to impact negatively on our country and the rest of our continent, Africa. This is by no means to deny the significant progress in many areas that we have achieved during the years since 1994. Nevertheless, responding to our current reality, our foundations took the decisions that something has to be done as urgently as possible to address this general and worsening crisis.
Our biggest oversight as a people lied in thinking that political leadership alone, on the strength of democratic mandate, would respond to these historical imperatives without falling prey to the temptations of power. Our system of democracy itself was modeled on the central assumptions that the ethically impeccable leadership model represented by the figure of President Nelson Mandela would continue to be the pivot on which would revolve leadership as society steamed on into the future. In such cases, societies let down their guard until, as seems to be the case now, they are shaken out of stupor by the turbulence of the historical process. At times, reaction during such seminal moments turns out to be too little too late. This is all the reason we should welcome the National Foundations Dialogue Initiative.
So where do we stand now? We are now in need of a leadership that can help us to restore the values that we have been losing. We need role models for this, and we need society at all levels to engage and to pull ourselves together. We need to return to the South Africa that is envisaged in our Constitution. We need leaders who serve instead of being served, and to restore Ubuntu to be part of the guiding principles for our nation. We are deeply in need of dialogue, where dissent is not seen as contentious. Youth and women have played an important and a positive role in our discourse. The women in our country and women in many parts of the world, including countries in conflict, are often a catalyst for change.
Let's get the Prof's input now from Pretoria. Professor, what do you think about this? Can we look forward to any success in this dialogue?
Well, I do think that it is an important and significant step because in the main, foundations have been issuing statements after each incident or scandal. But now they are beginning to use a forum. Therefore, that has to be significant. But on their own, without the civil society, without the other efforts which are taking place, I don't think they may have that impact. But cumulatively, though, they may add to the voice of the ANC veterans, to the voice of the tripartite alliance as it is trying to deal with this issue, and to the voice of the other civil society organizations and the opposition which are raising these issues. It is simply putting more pressure on the leadership of the ANC and the leadership of government to focus on the current challenges which many have denied they even exist.
Melo, what do you think?
For me, I think something that sort of encapsulates my sentiments about this national dialogue is something that Joseph Mathunjwa, AMCU president, said at this thing. He said, perhaps is the problem not that we are gathered here at this national dialogue to advance and to defend the gains of Kempton Park. By Kempton Park, he was referring to the CODESA agreements and the compromises that were made then. Because he's asking that in the aftermath of Marikana, why is there no need for such a dialogue in the country to revisit some of the compromises that were made in the country in terms of including people, in terms of paying people living wages and having an inclusive economy overall?
Yeah.
For me, I think that is very important, because if you look at this thing, it almost seems like people have come out now to say, we've set up a constitutional order, we've made these compromises, now you guys must follow through. Now, what's happening in the country is that the national dialogue is saying that we should review some of these things. So I think it has that danger of slipping into that mode of defending things that were already agreed to in the past. And I think also the other problem that I'm having with this is the issue seems to stem from personalizing the problems in the country.
Yeah.
Because fine, we're having problems in the country, but I think the problems in the country are much bigger than any single individual.
That's true.
The problems in the country are systemic. And once you want to attack the problems in the country from an individual basis by problematizing certain individuals and saying that this individual is the sole cause of all the problems in the country, I don't think we'll ever get to where we need to get. The problems are systemic and we need to review it from that angle.
Absolutely, no, I absolutely agree. Let me add on to that. My issue number one was, what do these individual foundations by themselves exist for? Because they've been there for years. And for me, it seems like, with the exception of the Thabo Mbeki Leadership Institute, I think they exist to propel the individuals that they are named after. So if you look at the F.W. de Klerk, for example, foundation, I think it exists to legitimize F.W. de Klerk, as a leader.
But they've all come together as a unified force, Dumsani. Shouldn't that be the first show?
I think it's more reactionary than a progressive one. I mean, why can't they meet and discuss issues of landlessness, or of joblessness, of homelessness? What is it? In fact, they've started to talk about these issues about 5 years ago or so. It's just that now they're only coming up publicly to launch this issue. But it's more reactionary. But having said that, it's important at any given moment of society to have a series of dialogues about the status and direction that the society is taking. So that is to be commended. But we can't deny the fact that they also have their own individual political agenda. Let me also mention as well that the Steve Biko Foundation is not there because they don't recognize F.W. de Klerk. And this process
are we ever going to move forward in your case, Dumsani? Are we ever going to make peace?
We will make peace, but we must assume responsibility for the things that we have done in the past to move forward.
Look, I just want to get something from the prop there. Professor, former Deputy President Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka says that South Africa is in need of a leadership to help restore values that the country has been losing. Do you think this is the initiative, this initiative rather, undermines the current leadership, or what?
Well, it is a direct response to the challenges that are often attributed to the current leadership. But again, I agree with the fellow panelists there that the biggest mistake we could make is to attribute everything to President Zuma or his leadership, because very soon he'll be off the stage when either his term ends or the politics play out and push him off the stage. But we may have many of the challenges that we're facing because these are deep structural systemic challenges that need us to step back and, if needs be, to review even our trajectory since 1994 to say some of the things may just not be working very well. For example, we have made big gains in terms of putting the infrastructure of democracy in place, the constitution, the Chapter 9 institutions, and so forth. And we've made major gains in the social security interventions, which is more on a consumptive stage and a security network for the poor. But in terms of the productive capacity of the state and its redistributive capacity, the country basically has not done well. And we ought to be asking ourselves why, and understand the forces at play at all different levels, as well as the global context that we're in.
All right. Well, unfortunately, that's where we leave it. No, I know, Melo, I know you wanted to add a little bit of something there, but unfortunately, gentlemen, that is where we leave it. Professor Somadoda Figeni joining us live from our Pretoria studios. Thank you so much for that analysis. And of course, Dumisani Hlope and Melo Magolejo right here with me in studio. Gentlemen, I'm going to say goodbye to you because I have to head on over to the next story now. The 2016-2017 ABSA Premiership season will go down as one of the most exciting and closely contested in South African history. Up to this stage, it is still not clear which team is going to walk away with the title. We have had at least 5 teams since the beginning of the season that were leading the log at some stage. And of course, we are looking forward to a very exciting finish to the league. Meanwhile, after months of speculation, the South African Football Association finally announces Stuart Baxter as the new Bafana Bafana head coach. And joining us now to discuss the above issues is senior SABC sports reporter, Mr. Sfiso Ramada. Sfiso, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Sfiso, let's start with the appointment of Baxter. A lot of people are saying, why did it take 4 months to decide? He's always been around.
Yeah, well, what people must understand is that initially Baxter didn't apply for this position. SAFA, in their short list of 5 coaches, we all know that Carlos Queiroz was their preferred choice. Hervé Renard was also part of that list, the former Zambian national team coach. But because of issues that were there in terms of existing contracts between those coaches and their respective teams, they couldn't afford to have those guys because most of them had to pay large amounts of money to secure their services. So they were left with no choice but to appoint Stuart Baxter as the new Bafana Bafana.
So is that what you're saying, Sfiso? We have no choice. So, but does then Stuart have, the means to perform his duties to the fullest?
Well, Stuart Baxter has been around in South Africa for a very long time. You look at the criteria that SAFA set out from the word go, the kind of candidate that they wanted was that that person should have a good track record in South African football. And without any doubt, Stuart Baxter has that. Stuart Baxter has that. But the biggest problem is the international experience. Stuart Baxter, without any doubt, he doesn't have the required international experience. But he's got some of the attributes that probably can elevate Bafana to another level. He has to hit the ground running. We don't have time. We're playing Nigeria next month.
That's what I want to find out about. Very quickly, Sfiso, while we're still dealing with the contract pertaining to Stuart Baxter, what exactly are the conditions of his contract? Is he on a review period for a couple of months, or what's going to happen?
Remember, SAFA, they still have to hold a formal media briefing to tell everyone what's happening. But as far as I know, he's on a 3-year contract, and without any doubt, we all know that it's the World Cup next year in Russia, and we've got the Africa Cup of Nations in 2019.
That's true.
So Stuart Baxter has to make sure he qualifies for both tournaments because he'll be in trouble if he doesn't qualify for one of the two.
That is some serious pressure to get in. Let's move on now to the PSL log. I mean, very interesting, both at the top and at the bottom. We've seen 5 teams gunning for the top position this season. Do tell us, a very interesting race at the top there.
Very interesting. I can't wait for the 3 o'clock kickoff.
We've got some deciders this afternoon.
Orlando Pirates against Mamelodi Sundowns. Sundowns, I think what impressed me is that, the they were far behind a couple of months ago because of the CAF commitments.
The tournament,
but
yeah.
they managed to
catch up.
Yeah, claw their way back, and they are in serious contention. But one must also mention new kids on the block, Cape Town City.
Yeah.
I mean, no one expected.
Outstanding job from Eric Tinkler.
Yes, and Pietermaritzburg, already they are leading by 3 points, and I'm tipping the Pietermaritzburg to take the league this season.
All right, and Orlando Pirates, do you think they're going to make it to the top 8? Looks like a sketchy
It's very, very tough.
Yeah.
Before matches yesterday afternoon, they were in the top 8.
Yeah.
They have now dropped to position 10. So all matches that Orlando Pirates still have to play are very important, starting with the match against Mamelodi Sundowns in Orlando this afternoon.
Sfiso, thank you so much for your time. I wish we could go on and on about football, but unfortunately, that is all we have time for. That is SABC Senior Sports Producer, Mr. Sfiso Ramada, talking to us about everything PSL and South African football. As for you at home, thank you so much for tuning in to Media Monitor. I do have a full bulletin of news right now at 10 o'clock. Stay tuned for that.
R1.4 billion was raised to build the institution. Additional funding came from ordinary South Africans.
It's been heartwarming to have seen the project from 2009 when the first sorting happened to see it today being completed. Indeed, this is going to be our benchmark going forward. It's just been incredible.
Jameh has said in the past that only